name is Rich, and this is Rich Talks Records, episode number 46. And in today's exciting episode, we will be discussing the 1967 album Small Faces by The Small Faces, their second eponymously titled album. The scope of this video and what the point of this video is going to be is, you know, The Small Faces, this is the album that they made. This was the first really major artistic statement as an album. And then, you know, they put out 4 singles in 1967. Each of those singles is incredible, and I really want to drill down and focus specifically on all of that. Before we start talking about the music and about this ridiculously fucking awesome album, we'll talk a little bit about where the Small Faces were at, just give some context as to their existence and what was happening. At some point, you know, one of the things I think you'll see with this channel, especially if you've watched all of the Public Image Limited videos, for instance, I'm telling, or the Iggy Pop videos or something, I am telling stories out of order. And I like doing that. I enjoy that. I like sometimes getting the middle first and the end part of the ending. You know, I enjoy that. That's interesting to me. So that's part of what I'm doing. So someday I'll get into the full origins of the Small Faces. And also someday I will do Ogden's Nut Gone Flake. And the era that I'm particularly fascinated by, the post-Ogden's Nut Gone Flake album, because which either nominally would have been called The Autumn Stone or 1862, and they recorded about roughly half of it, and I think that would have been one of the great albums. I think the band transcended themselves with each release. Basically, they only get better. It's just things are going to get better. They top themselves every single time. And I think that the Autumn Stone or 1862 album would have been another huge evolutionary leap for the band. So someday I will get into all of that. But today we really are strictly focusing on the band in 1967, the most transitional and important year of their very brief existence. Now, to talk about 1967, we have to talk a little bit about 1966. Part of the thing about understanding the Small Faces, and why I think maybe they never fully have become understood in America, is because it's not just that they're British, it's that the Small Faces were at the fulcrum of a lot of changeover in England, not just generationally, but musically, and also in terms of industry and in terms of subcultures. The Small Faces are weirdly a fulcrum on a lot of fronts. So the cultural arguments and the things that the Small Faces dealt with, I think, have kind of been lost a little bit over time. And then on top of that, it just doesn't really translate to America. It kind of in the same way that, like, in America, we don't have like the equivalent of like mods versus rockers. So, like, that's not a thing. So we have to understand it. We have to do a little bit of sociological digging to try to wrap our heads fully around all of that. The Small Faces stood between pop and rock, and they were a mod group, and they were a real band. They weren't like a boy band or something like that. They were a real band, and they were real mods. They lived the mod lifestyle, and they were more authentically mod. I mean, The Who never really lived the mod lifestyle, especially somebody like Roger Daltrey. I mean, Roger Daltrey wasn't a mod at any time. And so, but the Small Faces actually lived like that. The Small Faces were also, I think the other thing to kind of point out is the Small Faces at this point in 1967 were, I think Ian McClagan was the only one solidly in his 20s. I want to say everybody else was 19, 20, maybe turning 21. Like, they were very, very, very young. So Steve Marriott had been a child star, but then, I mean, he was sort of too. He was the Artful Dodger and Oliver, but he was sort of two kinds of child stars because then he became a star, in his late teens as well. And the Small Faces were breakout teen idols, and but again they were a real band, and they really wanted to play mod music. They wanted to play American soul and R&B, and that was what they were interested in. Now, the Small Faces are also another reason why it's very difficult to understand the Small Faces, especially for Americans, is because the Small Faces, I'm going to say, more than any other band. Am I going to make the bold and sweeping statement as to say more than any other band in the history of rock and roll? Maybe I'll go with that. That made it, and I mean that like has albums out that had charting singles, and I think they are the most fucked about band in the history of rock and roll. Like people just wouldn't let them be, and then when they were sort of at a point where they had sort of won the day. Steve Marriott just wouldn't let them be. So even then within his voraciousness for evolving the band, at some point he just sort of ran past the rest of the band. So there's just these very brief pockets of time where they're super productive and super prolific. And otherwise they're just caught in this maelstrom of adults, the British music industry, and then all of the weird cultural stuff that they had to answer for and had to bridge. And then the bridging of them going from being a mod band to a psychedelic band, et cetera, et cetera. So in 1966, so they were in with, if you know your Black Sabbath and Ozzy history, Don Arden, the original Suge Knight, the original Peter Grant, perhaps, the big impresario, the big tough guy. And as a humorous note, Don Arden had started off as a singer. So if you ever listen to the very odd cover that the Small Faces did of Del Shannon's Runaway, you will hear this bizarre faux operatic singing. That is Don Arden, and Don, the band put it in there because they thought it was hysterical. It was a piss take, and Don Arden apparently meant it very seriously and wanted to be taken very seriously with this insane, quote unquote, operatic singing. It is truly something to behold. So that's what I think of when I think of Don Arden, is this ridiculous intro that he does on the cover of Runaway. But Don Arden, the band wanted independence. Steve Marriott and Ronnie Lane were a formidable songwriting team, developed by leaps and bounds very, very quickly. One way to perhaps to understand the Small Faces is the idea that, kind of like Syd Barrett, the development phase is very, very short, and they not immediately, but very, very quickly become direct peers of people that they had been influenced by just a short time before. The difference is with early Syd Barrett, early Pink Floyd, is that there's Lucy Leave and I'm a King Bee, not much else. And then all of a sudden it's a jump and a skip from that to Arnold Layne. Whereas, as evidenced by the Decca years, the Small Faces development was rigidly covered, and you can watch their progress. Maybe kind of in a similar way to that of the Beach Boys, for instance. That sort of all the baby pictures are out there. And all of it's on record from a literally on record from a very, very young age. But the development was amazing. And even from their first single, What You Gonna Do About It, that alone, the other pop bands and the other teen idol bands in England who were kind of on the ballroom circuit, didn't make the waves that the Small Faces did. They were different from the very beginning, and it wasn't just that they were a mod band, and it wasn't just that they were a teeny bopper band. So their first single, "What You Gonna Do About It," not only was it later covered by the Sex Pistols in one of the great, hilarious Johnny Rotten vocals of all time, but the pretty much all feedback guitar solo was heard by John Cale, and John Cale was pretty blown away by it and brought the single to America, where I don't even think it had come out yet, and played it for Lou Reed and said, like, you know, Reed already had those early Velvet Underground songs, and they obviously were already doing feedback stuff and using it as a compositional tool and just part of their aesthetic. And Cale said, we've really got to get going, and we've really got to get the band together, because these guys are already doing feedback stuff. So the thing that's interesting about the feedback solo on "What You Gonna Do About It," though, is unlike the "Anyway, Anywhere, Anyhow," I hope I got the title sequence of those words right, which is like assaultive, and, you know, the Small Faces use of doing an all feedback guitar solo, or mostly feedback guitar solo, is actually really musical and really, really fits in with the song. It isn't jarring and it isn't assaultive. It's a great piece of sonic invention, and that's just on their very first single, and they're just like, they're these kids, you know, who had barely played together. So, but early on they were already influential, and the phenomenon of them being sort of cute teen idol, in the booklet for this, there's a great roundup of the sort of teeny bopper headshots, like "What's your favorite food" kind of interviews that they were doing. And the Small Faces early on got on the radar of Andrew Loog Oldham. And if you've watched my Rolling Stones videos, you will know, despite some of the issues with people getting paid and his waywardness, shall we say, I'm a really big fan of Andrew Loog Oldham. I can look past some of those things, because what he did for art and culture, and his enthusiasm and his passion and his taste level, very important, pushed culture forward. And there are great cultural gifts that came from his willingness to roll the dice and put himself out there and put these different artists that he worked with out there. So and then the autobiographies that he wrote later on gave great cultural context to some of those decisions, and to that of his colleagues and peers. So I like Andrew Loog Oldham a lot. I hold him in very high regard. So Andrew Loog Oldham had a great line about the Small Faces, and that is, "Don had the band down as the Partridge Family on amphetamines, whereas to me, the Small Faces transcended pop. They wrote national anthems." And I think that is a really, really, really good way of putting it. So the band broke away from Don Arden. Don Arden had put out a single. So the Small Faces in '66 had "All or Nothing," a self-penned song. The early songs, like "What You Gonna Do About It," "Sha La 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 Lee," those, they had professional songwriters writing that stuff. And then they were doing covers. They did like Sam Cooke's "Shake" and stuff. And they wanted to be a self-contained band. They wanted to write their own material. They were goddamn good at it. "All or Nothing" changed everything, because it showed that they could generate their own material. Don Arden put out a single "Without Their Wishes." They wanted to break away. There was all sorts of fallout in the press. Don Arden said that tried to rein them in by going to the band's parents and saying they're all on drugs. But they were able to break with Don Arden, and they briefly were with a manager named, I forget his first name, but Davison. So Davison sort of comes and goes, but I understand is that Davison brokered the deal with Andrew Loog Oldham, who had started Immediate Records, and this is when Andrew is like breaking away from the Rolling Stones, because he's going to go be this impresario in his own right. And so Andrew Llewellyn Oldham and his partner Tony Calder, who not enough people talk about, became basically the label owners and managers then of the Small Faces. And that basically alters the trajectory of the band forever. I mean, it's a completely different situation. So the story of the Small Faces is kind of that of two different bands in a way. There's the Small Faces on Decca, and then the Small Faces on Immediate. There is some overlap though. So the band at the end of '66 had gone in to make what they thought. Well, I guess actually technically it would have started in the summer of '66. Were trying to record what would have been their second album for Decca in the UK. And they had songs recorded and stuff left in the can. Don Arden, once they broke away, still put some of those things out, which is why they have such a vast Decca catalog, when relatively, in the grand scheme of things, it's an album and sort of an album's worth of singles, which would have been normal for a British group of that time. But there's this this vast trove of recordings. But so the songs that they recorded at IBC, they had these are from December of '66. Are My Way of Giving, the original version of Tell Me Have You Ever Seen Me, an instrumental called Pickaninny, Get Yourself Together, on December 16th. They recorded Green Circles, and Green Circles is really the bridge, because Green Circles is not only their transition into being more a pioneering psychedelic band, but they recorded some of it at IBC, and once they were over at Immediate, that's when they recorded. They started using Olympic Studios, which the Rolling Stones used, and was an amazing studio in England. One of the things that I find really interesting about music, and one of the things I've always found interesting, is when the form or a movement starts to become influenced by itself. So in rock and roll, one of the first of those for me really is Buddy Holly. Where Buddy Holly was like the first really major, to my mind, really major artist in rock and roll to be influenced by, Elvis, Carl Perkins, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and he moves, because he has his own influences and his own artistic voice, he moves the art form forward, right? You could say that then that leads to the Beatles, et cetera, et cetera. What is interesting, and kind of in the same way that later on in hip hop, Boogie Down Productions and Public Enemy, et cetera, are influenced by the immediate surroundings of LL Cool J, Run DMC, Kool Moe Dee, etc. Right? So it moves the art form forward. So part of what's amazing about the Small Faces is they were a British invasion band. I mean, they never were part of the British invasion of America, but they were one of those bands, the British beat boom or whatever, that were immediately influenced by those bands around them. So Ian McLagan, one of the reasons he started playing music is because he saw the Rolling Stones in 1963, and he was completely knocked out by him and was a total like Brian Jones obsessive. So there's that. There's also the fact that, again, kind of like Syd Barrett, the artistic decisions of the Beatles, and especially John Lennon, played a role in his decision-making and things he would do and things he would not do. Kind of like in America, how some of the things that the Rolling Stones would and would not do directly influenced the Doors. That there was the Stones didn't do this, so we won't, etc. Right? So I find that really, really interesting. That being said, in some ways, or in a lot of ways, Marriott and Lane, as a songwriting team and as a brilliant songwriting team, don't fit the cliches that you see a lot of John and Paul, the rock guy, the ballad guy, or Jagger and Richards, the tough guy, and then the guy, who has his eye on whatever the greater world, or however you want to phrase that. Lane and Marriott were temperamentally very different. They wrote a lot separately, but then you see where they complemented each other. And the other thing that's interesting is, like with Jagger, with Lennon and McCartney, they tended not to screw too much with like each other's lyrics. Every now and again there would be a "Baby, you could drive my car" instead of "Baby, you can wear my golden rings" or whatever. But generally speaking, the stuff remains a little bit more sacrosanct to each writer, whereas Marriott and Lane have extremely strong individual voices. Stronger individual voices, I would say, than Jagger or Richards do. And yet, a lot of their best stuff really is this interesting, fascinating blending of these two very, very different sensibilities. It's just that nothing sort of fits into the cliches. Steve is probably more direct overall, but as soon as you say that, you can think of a bunch of examples where he isn't. And Ronnie Lane can, as much as he can be more esoteric and mysterious, he can rock out and get into it and be direct with the best of them as well. So they're where they do fit into the mold of a Lennon-McCartney is that there was a sort of a friendly competition and that they directly inspired each other. And you see that throughout. And then you see that in microcosm with the two of them, and then you see that in greater detail with when they would take that material to the rest of the band. But the press was really, really pushing very hard, self-consciously, perhaps even, to anoint the band or mold the band, sort of through osmosis or through suggestion maybe, that they were going to somehow succeed or usurp the Rolling Stones. So you can kind of weirdly make the argument that the thing that like hung around the necks of the New York Dolls and Aerosmith and later on Guns N' Roses and 100 other bands in between kind of maybe starts with the Small Faces. This odd thing that they have to live up to. So that was written about. That was written about sort of as they emerged as countercultural voices, as they emerged away from being, more considered more of a pop band, but also the rawness and intensity of them as a stage act. Marriott as an extremely dynamic frontman who communicated directly to the audience. But also, there's a couple other funnier things. At the beginning of 1967, Steve Marriott starts dating Chrissy Shrimpton, who all those songs on Aftermath, Out of Time, and all like Under My Thumb, those are all written about Chrissy Shrimpton. So he's with Mix X, so It Girl Chrissy Shrimpton is one. The other thing is the Small Faces. There was the drug bust. They actually had a drug bust. So I'm pretty sure their drug bust was the first one that predates. So the Pilcher Squad that winds up working its way to Donovan and then the Rolling Stones and then the Beatles. That the Small Faces were the first, and the Small Faces were also on the move quite a lot. So in the same way that like the Stones. Where the Stones live, like Keith at Redlands, like that becomes famous. The Small Faces had a group house. Kenny Jones didn't live there, but they had a group house that they had to like move out of. So and then Steve later had to move out of his place in Chiswick again. So there's that they couldn't sort of deal with like the mass amount of people, and so that is also interesting. And then finally, you have just the phenomenon of immediate records, and you have the aesthetic of immediate records, and you have the influence and the cheerleading of both cultural and artistic of Andrew Loog Oldham. And you can clearly see the imprint that he left behind on both bands. And I think the concept of immediate records, right down to the logo. I mean, I feel like the logo sums up the aesthetics. I feel like that's the best logo ever for a record label. That's absolutely beautiful. I tried to find the name of the graphic artist who designed it. I saw it one time years ago, and I tried to find it again. I couldn't for the purposes of making this video. But immediate, like that's Andrew Loog Oldham, immediate, and that the cultural voice that hip hop later took of the immediacy and sort of the speaking to the moment, that and you see that throughout the British music weeklies of the time, especially if you go back and look at the Yesterday's Papers channel, which I think is one of the great resources on the whole of the fucking internet. But you go back and you look at the weeklies. There's this constant. Where is pop going? Where are we leading to? What does this record by the Beatles or whoever? What does this mean? What does this record by The Move signal for the future of British music? And it was something that was taken very seriously. And it was developing on such a week by week, month by month, then year to year basis. And that's one of the reasons, between not just the Beatles and the Stones, but the Kinks, the Who, the Yardbirds, etc., the Animals, etc., that you see these massive creative jumps that these people are making. It's such a hothouse environment that you see that mirrored in other places in art, throughout art history. And so the Small Faces are at the center of that, and that through the power of them as a stage act, through the greatness of their music, that they are very quickly not just influencing people, but they're very quickly rubbing shoulders. I mean, they record, they work on the backing track of In Another Land for Satanic Majesty's Request. When they were still at the Group House in Pimlico, they did acid the first time. Brian Epstein was the one who dosed them. He put the liquid lysergic diethylamide on orange slices, and they didn't know that they were getting it. So, I mean, they're immediately rubbing shoulders with people and being taken seriously by their peers and colleagues because they are just so fucking amazing. Decades later, Keith Richards, who slates everybody, he seems to like, a handful of reggae artists and AC/DC, and that's it. He shit talks everybody, basically. Steve Marriott, he said, was the best British singer. Like, I forget exactly what it was, but they blew everybody away, and they blew everybody away, rightly so, because they just were that fucking great, And also, I will throw in speaking of the British music weeklies, one of my favorite things has been doing the research. I did about I did about a good 250 odd pages of reading for this one, and trying to synthesize the different strains of the Small Faces story. But I do have to say, if you watch the Under Review documentaries, if you're on the Treble Clef channel on YouTube or out on Tubi or whatever, sometimes they pop up on Amazon. Chris Welch, you'll see Chris Welch pop up in a lot of them, and he detailed a lot of the Small Faces, and a lot of the information that I got for this video came from Chris Welch's pieces. He's great. I really like him a lot. But the other person who I just think very highly of, and true witness to history. He was there with the Stones in the studio the night that they found out that Brian Jones died. Keith Altham. So you'll see Keith Altham pop up in these things. Keith Altham did fucking authoritative writing about the band. So if you are ever able to find some of the original Keith Altham pieces about the Small Faces, go check those out and read them, because they are very, very interesting and worth your time. And he was a intimate of them and the Stones, etc. And he took it seriously. It's respectful, but it's also filled with lots of fascinating information. And one of the pieces of information that I think I'm going to throw out there is, I'm pretty sure he notes at one point that at a meeting at Immediate Records that they were listening to Ken Nordine. If you know who Ken Nordine is, the word jazz, and they were talking about how wild it is to have abstract, like just an abstract speaking voice on a record, and how crazy that would be to have that on a record. And this is like at the end of '67, and it got me thinking, holy shit, is Ken Nordine, of all fucking people, is Ken Nordine and one of the early fucking word jazz albums the reason why Stanley Unwin does the narration on Ogden's Nut Gone Flake? Is that has no one ever put that together? I'm putting it together. So I think it might be because of that, and that is just a one-sentence line in one of these articles. So I dare say I might have figured that one out. I don't know, but who knows? So anyway, let us finally talk about the exceptional, brilliant, glowing music of the Small Faces in 1967. Yes, the first release of the Small Faces in 1967, in that incredible year of theirs, was March of 1967. The song was recorded, was part of the January sessions. They had transferred over to Olympic. They're with Immediate, but they owed Don Arden one more single. They owed Decca one more single, I should say. Andrew Legoldham negotiated that. So that was the song, I Can't Make It. And I Can't Make It is kind of a perfect bridge. That is on this. One thing I should also say is I'm not one for going on about mono versus stereo. There are some people who feel very passionately on the subject. I will say that when I'm talking about all this, primarily I am talking about the mono mixes. I feel that the Small Faces are really our best heard in mono. Why? Because it is more immediate. Yes, it is immediate. The Small Faces are all about immediacy. They are the most immediate band that has ever existed. So I Can't Make It is a great sort of, again, rooted in R&B. It's a great piece of rock and roll. It is nearly Ain't Too Proud to Beg, but it's a fantastic song, great chorus. It's one of those sort of perfect Marriott Lane early compositions. It's probably at this point their second best song after All or Nothing. It's just a great, especially if you're making a single, and especially with their identity as a pop band. I think that, and a band that was really like rocking the singles chart, I think it is an excellent statement. So B-side, however, is called Just Passing, and Just Passing is wild. Just Passing it's a little over a minute, and it's I don't even know what it is. It is a truly bizarre waltz. A little later in the year, the band would be big fans of, I believe it's a Smiley Smile that they were big fans of. This is basically pre-Smiley Smile. It's all of that deconstructed psychedelic strangeness just sort of playing out, and it feels very homemade. It feels very hand-painted. It doesn't surprise me that they were fans of that album. And this is just a great, really eccentric miniature of a piece of psychedelia, and a fantastic B-side. It's kind of what B-sides were made for in a way, right? Especially in very early 1967. So that was their first single of the year. Now, the second single that the Small Faces put out. So I do want to touch upon this. Part of the greatness of the Small Faces is not only could they deliver live, not only did they write great songs, not only were they a great band, but they did seemingly the impossible, which is to make incredible albums and incredible singles. And that is a very, very hard discipline. So, you know, the Beatles were able to do it, Kinks were able to do it, Stones were able to do it. Later on, you know, Joy Division was able to do it. Later after that, Prince was able to do it. But really, that's a tough one to be able to pull off. And the Small Faces, and I know that Steve Marriott like really wrestled with this identity as a pop band, and that they were a singles band that made hits, and he wanted to be taken more seriously as an album band. But really, they were just so exceptional at both, and they were great at both. And, now that we are decades removed and we don't have any sort of the baggage, we're not sort of concerned about the pop scene or whatever, you can simply enjoy it all, So the second single, this is the first immediate single. This is where they are fully up and running. This is, the transition is over. And this was recorded in May of '67. So all of the first album would have been recorded by this point, because they were finishing the mixing in April and May. So this is the first thing to post-date the album sessions. But we'll be talking about the album shortly. But the single is Here Come the Nice. And Here Come the Nice is, it's what the box set is named after. It is a signature song. It is an absolutely phenomenal piece of pop psychedelia. And it's interesting. One of the things that's interesting about it is that apparently part of the lyric idea comes from a religious tract. And that is, the psychological angle of that is very interesting. That it is essentially then a drug dealer, or the drug is portrayed in quasi-religious terms. That's fascinating. That's a fascinating angle. And it is not that far of a difference from what the Velvet Underground had with I'm Waiting for My Man. That the dealer is the healer and the devil in one, right? Except there's no hint of devil in this. This is pure infatuation and pure running headlong into the rush. Steve Marriott posited the theory that the reason why they were able to get away with such an explicit song, because one of the things about Here Come the Nice is this basically is to drug usage what Let's Spend the Night Together is to premarital sex or fornication. It's presented sort of as without guilt, as a purely exciting proposition, and that it's gonna be the best thing that's ever happened to you. And it's an interesting angle, because I don't know that, a lot of people, when they would write about their drug experience, it's first person subjective, right? It's interesting that this is sort of projected onto the dealer, or maybe by extension in a way onto the drug culture itself. It's an interesting piece of psychology, an interesting piece of songwriting. Are there shades then? Is this figure then an abstract portrait of Brian Epstein? Interesting. It could be. But it is a phenomenally melodic song. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Steve Marriott put forward the idea that the reason why they were able to get away with it, as opposed to, I forget, he name checks bands that I just have never heard of, that I don't know that they got very far, more sort of pop-oriented bands, was that because they had come from the pop background, that they were able to get away with it. They were sort of given the benefit of the doubt with Here Come the Nice, that they wouldn't have gotten if they were the Who or the Rolling Stones. So, but it is a phenomenal single. It's indelible. It's melodically beautiful. The harmonies are amazing. It's perfectly put together, and one of like another one of the high watermarks. The fact that they were able to write this song and, you know, come up with, especially just hot on the heels of having finished such an exceptional album, is amazing. Now we get the B-side. So the B-side I talked about, so it was an album track from side 2 of the album. I'm going to talk about it here because I think it's actually in some ways more interesting to talk about it here than it is on the album. And the B-side is called Talk to You. I do wonder if it is written about a Chrissy Shrimpton type person. But speaking of interesting psychological angles that other people would not have taken, Eric Burden wasn't going to write about his drug dealer in such a fashion. That was never going to happen, right? And Keith Richards wasn't going to write. That was never going to happen. You know, Mick wasn't going to write like that. But another interesting piece of psychology is you look at the songs that Mick wrote about Chrissy Shrimpton, right? And they are nasty, and they are domineering, and it is this assertion. There's a lot of black humor, a lot of gallows humor in that. I mean, I love those songs, but it is a outsized person, an outsized force asserting himself, right? What I find fascinating about Talk to You is it's another plea. It's another wanting emotional reality from a person. And it's another sort of statement of that he wants to meet this person on equal terms. And that he's not trying to throw some sort of angle on her. It's a plea for open and honest communication. I find that really interesting. How many other people would have thought to write the song from that angle? On top of that, this is a really boiled down, you know, the thing about the Small Faces, and this came out later too, especially when you get into some of the stuff on Ogden's Nut Gone Flake and then after. The thing about the Small Faces, and obviously you hear this in the early stuff, like on the BBC sessions and stuff, they could rock like motherfuckers. And that's part of their what's so great about them, is they have this side where they just are a pure rock and roll band, and they can really do that shit. Like, and they could, like, it's blood and guts. And I love that. And Talk to You is just such a tough, gutsy, like, Steve Marriott's way of playing rhythm guitar. Like, I know that he didn't really rate himself as a guitar player, but god damn it, he was fucking great. And he was a great rhythm man. Like, a fantastic rhythm man. And if, like me, if that's what you love about Lou Reed's playing, if that's what you love about Richie Havens, if you love the Everly Brothers for the rhythm guitar playing, if you love the Rolling Stones in part for Keith's rhythm playing, like, that's, like, I love that. And he is just, it's so tough and tight and perfect. And the rhythmic kicks and the accents and the way Kenny and Ronnie answer what he's doing, amazing. Talk to You is an absolute fucking quiet little masterpiece. It's not quiet in that it's a loud rock and roll song, but it doesn't draw attention to itself. But like, the more you listen to Talk to You, the more you're like, god damn it, this is good. And Steve is singing for his life. It's a great performance. It is a great song. And again, as a piece of how to, like, an angle to approach a relationship song, it's an interesting one and a cool one. And I love it. And the fact that that's a B-side, it works great as an album track, right? And it's great on here. But as a B-side, as the flip to Here Come the Nice, so looking at the drug culture, looking at the new, you know, whatever, sexual revolution, it's a fascinating pop art statement. And from guys who are now sort of being accepted into the world and coming into their own as men. Brilliant. This is, as I said, the 1967 album by the Small Faces. It is their second album. Their first album, recorded for Decca, that came out the year previously, was also called The Small Faces. So there's kind of two of everything with the Small Faces. So what we are not going to concern ourselves with in this video are the US releases, because I think more than any other band, you know, the Beatles' US albums are, if you care at all about artistic intention, are a travesty. I'm sticking to that. The Stones sometimes fared better with their US albums. It kind of all depends on how you keep score. The Animals got it pretty bad. The Yardbirds weren't done a ton of favors, but I think the most mangled. The Who had some pretty strange ones, but I think the most mangled are the Small Faces, and there are but 4 Small Faces, which is the U.S. vague equivalent of this album. Some people seem to really like it. I think it is almost an act of sabotage. It appears that, like, whoever put it together, not knowing who put it together, it would appear that, like, they don't like the Small Faces at all, would be the impression. It is just such a bizarre butcher job. The cover art's kind of pretty, but oy vey. The other thing we're not going to concern ourselves with is the Don Arden helmed sort of revenge album for signing with Immediate, From the Beginning. Or is it called From the Beginning? Yeah, From the Beginning. I always forget. So it's like, that's another weird knockoff. It's A's and B sides, and then it's like the cover is like from the same photo shoot for the debut album. It's a mess. What we're really focusing on in this video are the things that the Small Faces themselves released and cared about as they wanted it released. So we're not going to talk about the Don Arden singles that came out without their wishes. The other thing that we're not going to go too far down into, so this is the 2-disc set that came out on Charlie. This is excellent. This was off the master tapes. If you know anything about the Small Faces, as Immediate Records, as Andrew, as Andrew pissed away Immediate Records, the Small Faces, I mean, there's an infinite number of compilations. They've been compiled into infinity. And as Steve Marriott pointed out, there were some early 80s compilations that had songs that weren't even the Small Faces. So as things have reverted back to the band, and they re-won rights to things, and Andrew, God bless him, eventually, decades later, helped out with that. There's a lot of bonus tracks on here, and this is basically bonus tracks. I mean, that's kind of what this is, right? This gigantic behemoth set that I'm not even going to open because it is because it's such a behemoth. So there are, Jesus, you can really fall down the rabbit hole of alternate takes with the Small Faces, and we're just not going to do that in this video. I just think that would turn into forest for the trees, and I really want to get across how great the band was and how great their ability to conceive music and articulate it and release it was, and that they are at the same level as any of the other great bands from that time. So I don't want to go too far down the other rabbit holes. I will touch upon some of the outtakes as I think it is relevant, but truly there's just an infinite number of alternate takes, backing tracks, etc., etc. The box set's cool, but that's advanced studies if you want to go off on your own and check that stuff out. The Here Come the Nice box set doesn't appear to be online, or at least it's not on YouTube. If you do like the Small Faces, though, you might want to figure out a way to obtain a copy, or at least be able to hear the music, because there is some really exceptional stuff. And this is, again, off the masters. As things went along, copies of things would get used, and so I think that also negatively impacted the Small Faces' reputation as time went by. So we're really, really focusing, we're zeroing in on artistic attention, and I just watched some to use the colloquial Black American phrase, there was just yet another dilly broad on with nonsensical, garbage theories about the death of the whatever. I just saw it just the other day, and how there's no such thing as genius, and all this absolute brain pollution. No, and I think artistic intention counts a hell of a lot, and that is one of the many things that we assert here at Rich Talks Records. So yeah, if you can obtain a version of this, there also is another Charlie version of this that I think came out a couple of years later. This is the one that I got. So this is from 2012. I think there's another version of it. This, however, version is what is up on YouTube. So if you find the Small Faces on YouTube, you can listen to this. But again, you're listening on YouTube, so I don't really think the fidelity, this was mastered really, really well. And when you play it out on the stereo, sounds fucking fantastic. Kenny Jones and Ian McClagan approved. So it is very, very worth it. Why am I talking about this album now? I'm talking about this album now because as I film this is the end of October, and I think that this is one of the great autumn albums of all time. I think it's one of the most autumnal albums ever made. It's the Small Faces are an autumn band. I've always thought that. No, not just because they have a song called The Autumn Stone. All right, relax. There is, especially once we get into the immediate era, this album, Ogden's Duck on Flake, and what would have been 1862 or The Autumn Stone, this is autumn music. They're the autumn house band for me, in the same way that Public Image Limited is the winter house band. So that's why we're talking about this, and I'll touch upon that analogy maybe a little bit more, but let us start talking about music. So first of all, Immediate Records. Look at that beautiful, beautiful cover, kind of action, like pop art action album cover. It's clean, it's immaculate, it's immediate, glorious. I always love this album cover. It's just so perfect. It's such a perfect piece of graphic design. So the first song, it's one of the transitional songs from Decca. So there are earlier versions of it on some of these, and you'll hear alternate versions of this song. I think all of the original songs as recorded at IBC for Decca, for what would have been the second album, all are vastly improved by the re-recordings in every single instance. I think they only got better, and I think the band was just developing at such a rate that they kind of could do no wrong. So first song on the album is Tell Me, brackets, Tell Me, end brackets, Have You Ever Seen Me? Amazing. So the thing about this album is this album splits the difference somewhere between Revolver and The Who Sell Out. There is again, sort of how I had talked about the second Fugs album, there is that crackling intensity, shock of the new, and not to belabor the point, but immediacy. It hurtles at you. It commands your attention. And it is the band really, really announcing themselves. Beautiful drum intro from Kenny Jones. This is a phenomenal drum performance. This is a phenomenal rhythm section performance, because you've got Ronnie Lane threatening to steal the show the entire time, because he has a propulsive galloping bass, fantastic bass playing, and again, because of they were going off the actual tapes and the mastering, you can properly hear the rhythm section, and it is a glorious thing to behold. And then you have Steve's tight acoustic guitar playing, just absolutely exact. You could set your watch by it. Perfect acoustic guitar playing. And what is interesting is it totally could have gone for big electric guitar, and it doesn't, and it actually gives the whole thing a different texture and actually even more immediacy, because you have the gulf between the greatness of the rhythm section and then that vocal, it's so assertive and so powerful and such a great melody. Like, this is a melodic wonder. And this is, to use a phrase I use on this channel, it is compulsively listenable. This song, like, from the time I bought this, I was like, this is basically a perfect song. This is a perfect, like, I just say British Invasion as okay, like a perfect British Invasion song. The band is perfect. Steve's voice, and then when it's double tracked, is truly, truly glorious. And it just, it commands your attention. I love it so much. And really simple lyrics. So part of this, so this album side is 15 minutes and 1 second. So not only do the Small Faces immediately influence the Velvet Underground, not only are they in up there with the Beatles and the Stones, not only is there a sort of proto hip hop sense in that the album is immediately about the culture and immediately impacting the culture, right? So not only is there that, not only do they prefigure Britpop by quite a wide margin, and if I'm being completely honest, wipe the floor with every single Britpop band that ever was. Sorry, but not even close to my way of thinking. And then, holy Christ, not only that, but they basically prefigure fucking post-punk. I mean, this is pre-Minutemen, pre-pop group, pre-Wire. These songs are minimalist, perfect constructions. There is not a wasted second. And the other thing is you have part of what's so great about it is you have the great rhythm section. You have Steve. You have this amazing voice, right? And you have some people have called Steve England's greatest soul singer. I largely agree, with the exception of, I do have to give it to Eric Burdon, because Eric Burdon's voice is a wonder, like from another planet. So Steve is a proud and strong second, and there's no shame in that. There's no shame in being second to Eric Burdon, right? Like, Steve is right there. Like, he's right there with Eric Burdon. But this absolutely beautiful voice, and you know, and super minimalist lyrics. Like, the verses are like 1 or 2 lines, but that, I think, is it the third verse? It's the final verse where you think it's going to wrap up even sooner than it does, but then that flowers. There are flowers breaking through the concrete, and that's what this feels like. That's what this is. It is a burst of energy. It is a burst of life. This is magnificent. It's magnificent. It's everything they do perfectly right away. Interestingly, I think it's Kenny Jones who said that when they recorded this, they knew that they were now in the realm of the Stones and the Beach Boys and the Beatles, and it is hard to argue with that. I nearly forgot. Ian McClagan. You would think that he's not doing much. No. Listen close. The Mellotron. So underneath everything else, you have these beautiful drones and these beautiful textures being created by Ian McClagan. Ian McClagan makes incredible use out of the Mellotron on this album. So this is where it first pops up. Okay. So then we move into something I want to tell you. So if Steve is extroverted, right, Ronnie Lane is introverted. So this is an introverted soul ballad. This is a self-examination of a relationship. And again, Steve mostly keeps it to guitar. He's kind of in the background on this song. Ronnie, it's a beautiful kind of wandering melody, and the way that he sings it is so interesting because it's emotionally open and it's very vulnerable, but on the other hand, there is a little bit of a sneer or a little bit of a sort of a slur to it that kind of almost subliminally communicates Right, don't mess with me. There is sort of a don't mess with me undertone to it, and that I find really compelling. But then what you really, really have on this song is, first of all, you have Ian McLagan's Hammond organ breaks that are as like, it would have been the only way that you could have improved Blonde on Blonde. I mean, just fucking perfect. It's like a beautiful like counter melody to what Ronnie's singing. Like it's this whole other element. But then he just kind of steals the show. Like Ian just sort of steals the show with like an outro solo, and it starts getting really into like where he's like really playing soul music and soulful soul music. You know, he's not like replicating other people's licks. It's really beautiful and really intense, but also like really like intimate. And that's part of what I love about this album, and why I say, one of the reasons I say that it feels autumnal, is there's an intimacy, and that it's not a blasting out of your car driving down the street album. It is something after, like, when it is a little colder outside and you're indoors and you're thinking deeply about the state of things. So amazing. Then we get into Feeling Lonely, and this is where the album. So we're off to a hell of a start, because even the way Something I Want to Tell You kind of tumbles in right on the heels of Tell Me Have You Ever Seen Me. But now, then, those are both sort of tumbling forward. This is where it takes a step back, and you take a step back and really gaze at the beauty of what the band is creating. This Feeling Lonely is 1 minute and 35 seconds. That's wild. That doesn't make any sense, because it contains so much. First of all, harpsichord. So I feel like harpsichord evokes autumnal to me, right? And this is where sort of the Who Sell Out comparison starts to come in, because there is that weird after the party autumnal feel, after the summer feel of the Who Sell Out. But the part of the thing that I love about the Who Sell Out, aside from all the radio conceit stuff, which is great, but the thing about the Who Sell Out, especially if you listen to like the expanded version and you just treat it like it's a double album, which you should, I think, is the melodies just keep coming. It's one after another. It's just, you are being like hurtled through, and you're overwhelmed by just how many of these songs they wrote and how kind of beautifully constructed they are, right? So Feeling Lonely is that. Like, and you've got Steve's voice. So this is where Steve starts really singing soul, and where he starts really fucking belting it out, singing with soul, right? And he, again, this isn't mimicking, this is real stuff, you know? And so Feeling Lonely is such a magnificent piece of emotional vulnerability. When Steve sings, I feel that I am part of a wheel. It's my Achilles heel, feeling lonely. Jesus, that's fucking good, right? Like, and just the sense of like where he's pleading with the woman, because what he's pleading with is emotional reality. He wants her to be as open with him as he's being with her. He wants it's about sharing that energy. It's about honesty, right? It's a plea for honesty, right? And that is beautiful subject matter. And you aren't going to get that certainly from this point of Mick Jagger. You aren't going to get that from Ray Davies. You know, that need for, again, immediacy is, and sung in such a way, but then with like that it's accompanied by this beautiful harpsichord playing. Like, it's instrumentally, it is the perfect, interesting, sort of asymmetrical angle complement to what is an absolutely beautiful vocal performance and a beautiful, like, completely beautiful set of lyrics. And yeah, so that is... So then we get into the fourth song. And this is part of what I love about this album, the uniqueness and the level of creativity of this album. We have Happy Boys Happy, which is a Booker T and the MGs level fucking instrumental, led and dominated by Ian McClagan, though goddamn Kenny Jones is doing his very best to steal the show. Kenny sounds awesome, but all those breaks that he does are fucking fantastic. But this is Ian's show, and it is a magnificent little instrumental, like the last song, minute and a half. You don't need more than that. Like, it's perfect. It's perfect, and it is the perfect bridge to the next song, Steve. Another beautiful, beautiful soul song. Things Are Gonna Get Better. And the thing about Steve Marriott is that sense of optimism. And I think Ronnie Lane could be optimistic too. I think they both were. And I think that's part of what's so interesting about them. But the thing is, by the time you get to Things Are Gonna Get Better, especially with, one song removed from Feeling Lonely, is you're, how do I put this? Every single chord progression, especially that intro of Things Are Gonna Get Better, every single chord progression, every single rhythmic choice is the right one. And it's kind of like, to make like a food comparison, it's not that it's necessarily some wild thing that no one could have ever thought of, but it's right? So like if you go to like a great Italian place and you taste the egg in the pasta, like they made it back there and they made it right. The guy that made it was up at 6 a.m. making the pasta. Like, it's right. So it doesn't have to be extraordinary virtuoso stuff, but it's right. And that's part of what the alternate takes and all the other stuff bears out. Every decision they made was the right decision, and it's perfect, and it's done with like care and love and passion. And so that's the thing with Things Are Gonna Get Better. Also, you have fantastic... Ian McClagan, again, has like a mini symphony going on underneath all of that with drones and textures. And then you have beautiful backing vocals, like sort of call and response vocals, that then like burst out into psychedelic, like a psychedelic spectrum at the end. It's fucking gorgeous. It's fucking gorgeous. And that's a little bit more, that's nearly 3 minutes. But then that's almost like then the lead-in for the next extraordinary song, and maybe the capper of this part of the album, My Way of Giving. My Way of Giving, I'm gonna just go and say, is as good as anything on any of that run of Otis Redding albums. It is a brilliant soul song, and the drama that it builds up with, and the way the rhythm section holds it together, like Kenny's sense of dynamics, it's absolutely beautiful. And just that, like, it's a way of living. What more would you have me do? Like, they're just such fucking great lyrics, and real lyrics, and emotionally honest lyrics. And I think that, again, by this point, Ray Davies, it's all character study, and he's a genius, and it's all complex character studies, and Townsend, I mean, there's a million things going on, and it's being filtered through Daltrey. Mick, you're never really going to know exactly what Mick's thinking, and so part of what I love so much about Steve Marriott and his singing style and his writing style is that he, to me, is part of like a triumvirate with John Lennon, and in a more obtuse way, Syd Barrett, that you are looking at Van Gogh's ear, and I know I've used that Rene Ricard line before, but you really are. Like, when you listen to Jug Band Blues, when you listen to Vegetable Man, when you listen to Julia, when you listen to any number of John songs, it's Van Gogh's ear, and you have to take it seriously. You know, it compels you to care. And that's part of what is so beautiful about My Way of Getting. It is just this stunning, vivid song, and melodically perfect. The voice is perfect. It, like, what more could you want as a listener? And it is just one song after another. But that all sets up the big epic, and it's not an epic. It's 2 minutes 46. The big epic side closer, the song that was begun at IVC and then finished at Olympic. Is it George? Is it Chakayance? I don't know, but he's a great engineer who has worked on a lot of great records. Also on this record, the other, because the Small Faces were basically self-producing by this point. We have Andrew Loog Oldham in sort of the old school version of production, which I talked about in the Tim Buckley video. This is in collaboration with the young Glyn Johns. So this is some of Glyn Johns' first stuff, and sort of showing what a giant he was. But also working in collaboration with Eddie Kramer. Yes, Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, Eddie Kramer, who did Rock and Roll Over, which is the best Kiss album, if you're ever wondering that. So we have the absolute visionary psychedelic masterpiece of Green Circles. This is really where Ian McLagan pulls out all the stops. We not only have piano, we have mellotron, we have harpsichord. This is his symphony. But this is also one of the great pieces of action art drumming. I mean, if you like the Who stuff from this time, or if you like The Creation, Kenny Jones fucking smokes a lot of that stuff on this. Like, Kenny Jones, again, his use of dynamics, his use of open spaces, his controlling of the atmosphere. It's pre John Densmore by a hair, because this was started in December of '66. Strawberry Fields wasn't out yet, so this is a pioneering, visionary piece of psychedelia. I Can See for Miles wouldn't have been out yet when they started this. This is somewhere between what the Beatles are doing and I Can See for Miles. This is so it's primarily a Ronnie Lane song. It is, and so when I talk about autumnal, in the same way that when you walk down a street in autumn and you see the trees that you've always seen, but they're now very special because of the vivid reds and the vivid yellows, and you can look and appreciate the beauty of something that you see every day and normally maybe wouldn't think about or appreciate the beauty of. That's what I mean by autumnal, because what they're doing is they have a great song that in somebody else's hands could have been a cool, like, acoustic, maybe slightly eccentric story song, right? Or like a weird allegory or fable or something. But they take it and stretch it into all these different shapes in only 2 minutes 46 seconds, by the way. Like, and as a melodic construction, and the way Ronnie sings it, and the way that McLagan underscores that, and the melodic underpinning, the melodic twists and turns are absolutely beautiful. It's a beautiful piece of lyric writing. It's great, weird, eccentric English storytelling, right? It's Lewis Carroll. It's that odd thing back to the like pre-Victorian era that some of these guys were able to like really route into, and it's just it. And it's I guess it's pre-Syd Barrett too, isn't it? So fucking Syd Barrett, like it's that weird thing of somewhere between See Emily Play and I Can See, like it's right there. It's brilliant. This is December '66 that they're doing this. The alternate takes, there are a number of them. They're all amazing. It's worth hearing. So check out the box set. Check out the alternates that are included here. I think there's 2 on here. They're great, but it's all pathways to how they got. It's just like listening to the earlier alternates of Strawberry Fields Forever. Amazing, beautiful, but it all leads to the masterpiece that is the thing. And I think it's George Chikayance who did the work. Speaking of who sell out, the end has and also Pre-Love. And that's another thing. I think that what I talked about in the Love video, the combination of earthiness and being ethereal, that you have that between Ronnie Lane and Steve Marriott. And so it's ethereal, it's psychedelic, it's beautiful. But then you've got the part where Steve is singing, where it's mod action painting, fucking pop art explosion stuff, and it's rocking, and so the contrast, the moods, the textures, it's a symphony. It's fucking beautiful. It's perfect. It's one of the greatest fucking recordings of all time. It's green circles. What else can you say? You know, you have the earthiness, you have the etherealness. It takes something in the natural world and makes it appear supernatural. It's psychedelic in the absolute truest sense. Brilliant. And a brilliant ending to side one to this exceptional, ridiculous album. And then theoretically, you know, speaking symbolically, we shall flip the record over. Side two opens with Become Like You. Basically like a beautiful kind of waltz, sea shanty, folk ballad, just under 2 minutes. Which the folk thing is not for nothing, because it kind of takes the one of my favorite songs of all time, I Wish I Was a Mole in the Ground, and kind of runs with that, making these sort of ridiculous or absurdist, not ridiculous, but absurdist sort of comparisons, but absolutely wonderful. And the back and forth between Steve and Ronnie, or Ronnie's answering of Steve's phrases, absolutely fantastic. And again, kind of Ian kind of steals the show with a beautiful floating solo. And again, the drones that he achieves and the underpinning, it adds so much. It adds so much depth to what you're hearing, and it's just such a beautiful song. But then part of what I love about it too is because there's the thing about Steve Marriott is hyper creative, brilliant, amazing performer, amazing voice. But one of the things about Steve Marriott that's so cool is he projects so much likability. And not a lot of Mick Jagger or Ray Davies, or like, they project a lot of things. I don't know that they necessarily project likability. And there's the lack of pretension of Steve Marriott. And all you have to do is watch 10 seconds of any interview with him, and he's like one of the least full of shit people that you're ever gonna see. That comes through. So the fact that, like, would my brains be where I sat? The fact that there's like little jokes and part of what I love about the spirit of all of this. And again, that's part of what I love about the Beatles, and that like there's like little jokes, and they're poking around, they're exploring, they're kind of trying to see what's on the other side. And I absolutely love that quality of it, and there's something about that's kind of, that inspires me constantly, So, and then so just like at the end of the big shuddering sort of climax of Green Circles, as it breaks into the radio broadcast, and it kind of prefigures like some of the stuff on Love's Forever Changes, and the sort of, tampering with the film itself, so to speak. There's a great moment where the song is sort of fading out, but the backing track just starts again, and they leave it in there. So you hear Steve like, "Oh, it's starting again," and like he laughs, and it's just such a, like, I love that. I love that they left it in there. I love that that's then like part of the song, and you look forward to that. It's fantastic. So, but this album, hurtles by. Side 2 is 15 minutes and 23 seconds. It's 22 seconds longer than side 1. and they're already another band entirely. A little bit more in line of with Tell Me Have You Ever Seen Me, but Get Yourself Together, a fantastic, beautiful pop art soul song, and again, super beautifully propulsive rhythm. Ronnie Lane, Plonk nickname. His nickname was Plonk. Ronnie Lane, like another beautiful, propulsive bass line. And god damn it, that fucking Ian McClagan with the organ breaks and another like beautiful solo. But again, the emotional immediacy and believability of Steve's vocal performance, it's so real, but so like extroverted and likable, charismatic. That's the word I'm looking for. It's so goddamn charismatic. There's a reason all those little girls the screaming girls liked him. There's a reason, because he was goddamn charismatic. And also kind of it's funnily that I'm thinking about it. Like I read this one thing about fans and the fandoms of the time, and it really is interesting that like how the Beatles and the Stones sort of bridged the gap of teeny bopper and then serious rock bands. But at this point in England, I mean, you had the Monkees and you had Davy Jones, who was another short, because that's the thing with the Small Faces. They were faces, they were mods, they were real mods, but they were short guys. I'm just under 5'7", so I feel like I relate to them on some level, and that would explain Steve's outsized need to assert himself, right? So I get that. So they were small faces. I love that. There's a lot of other derivations of supposedly what the name means, but that's what it was. I love that. That's fucking great. But it's interesting that I've talked a lot about splitting the difference of things. Steve Marriott, as a pop idol, weirdly does split the difference between a Davy Jones and a Mick Jagger. It's a weird combination, and yet there it is. Except, I mean, I love the Monkees and everything, but Steve was, a self-contained artist. So I don't want to like, and they rebelled very hard against the teen idol thing, but there's just so much likability and this like perfect. So it's 2 minutes 16 seconds. This like perfect boiled down immediate song that just is like indelible, and you can sing it and again, great use of backing vocals. Amazing. And then they're another band again as we go into All Our Yesterdays. All Our Yesterdays has a Lazy Sunday-esque prefiguring what they would do on Lazy Sunday. Steve bellowing an introduction in a very exaggerated Cockney accent and introduces Ronnie Lane. And this is where we have Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames horn section. And this is a wild, like, Ronnie Lane is basically like crooning, and it's a great song. It's really weird. It's like a sloshy Dixieland jazz band playing over kind of a New Orleans rhythm. Ian McClagan is doing kind of Fats Domino piano rolls. It's a beautiful piece of work. I absolutely love it, and I love the slightly self-conscious singing. And there's just such a weird atmosphere to it, like a great atmosphere and a real spirit of fun. It has that sort of great Gary U.S. Bonds 2:45 party in the studio atmosphere, that it's very riotous and again charismatic, and you love it, and it creates this whole world. It's over in 1 minute and 53 seconds. You're in this world, and then poof, it's gone. And they are again another band on the next song, "Talk to You." So "Talk to You" is great, but it's a B-side, so we'll move on. And they're again yet another band. So the next song is "Show Me the Way," which Ronnie Lane sings. And this is like Green Circle's The Morning After. This is after the mysticism and the rush. And it is just this beautiful, vulnerable, again, introspective piece of spiritual yearning, I suppose, a yearning for spiritual fulfillment. It's an absolutely beautiful song, and Ian McLagan has the harpsichord going. I think that this and Green Circles are his most sophisticated and best work. The lead into the chorus that he does is absolutely beautiful. It is so emotionally open and just has such a graceful, beautiful effect. And it is a miraculous song. It is as much of a shuddering shiver as Green Circles, except this is quiet and to the self, whereas Green Circles is outward and has big explosions. This really is the other side of that, and an absolutely magnificent song. And kind of the perfect lead-in, because this is such a perfectly constructed album and so perfectly sequenced. We get to do we want to call? I don't really want to call him the George Harrison of the Small Faces, because that doesn't really make a ton of sense. But in a George Harrison-esque role, in an album dominated by the songwriting team of Steve Marriott and Ronnie Lane, we get the lone Ian McLagan song sung by Ian McLagan. And I guess like his first song ever, Up the Wooden Hills to Bedfordshire. This is fucking incredible. So, and the perfect lead-in. Because again, the thing is, and kind of like with Become Like You, so from some of the songs on side one into Green Circles, Become Like You has sort of the vibe of what I had talked about in the Rolling Stones, some of the vibe of Aftermath, where it does feel like it's this band playing on a ship somewhere out of time. It could be from like the 1910s. It's evocative of a history that wasn't, right. And I talked about sort of routing into the like pre-Elizabethan stuff. Well, Up the Wooden Hills to Bedfordshire is straight, Brothers Grimm. It's pre-Wicked Annabella, but it gets you there. It gets you there even faster, and it is a wild sort of eerie rush. Eerie a lot of times means slow. Eerie can be fast. Eerie can come at you quick, and Hills to Bedfordshire, like they don't waste a fucking second, and they just come at you, and Ian's repetition of when you're slipping into sleep, and I think it's meant to sound nice, or like when that's the time to unwind, that's the time of no time. But it sounds fucking terrifying, partially because Kenny Jones is like playing ahead of the beat, and it's so weirdly agitated, and it's such a weird ADHD rhythm that he has going, and skeletal and creepy. And again, this is Brothers Grimm. This is the children in the forest at midnight, scared because they don't know where they are, and you see like the wooden bridge with planks missing that they have to run across quickly, and it's just so evocative of an older world in England, and almost medieval in a way. It's just a remarkable song, piece of music, piece of atmosphere, piece of recording. This is a fucking unbelievable band operating at like peak powers, right? And what's so funny is the song is 2 minutes and 5 seconds, and the last 15, 20 seconds of it, they just go into like playing in this weird out of time, like they're playing backwards, everything's going wrong, they're trapped in the witch's fucking gingerbread house or something. Like it just goes out of time and becomes a studio experiment. So between that, Green Circles Become Like You, like them playing with the form, them playing with the recording medium, with the studio as an instrument. This is beautiful, brilliant stuff. And then we come to the final song on the album. This is all visionary stuff. This album puts its foot on your neck and doesn't let up for a second. And then we finally get to the last song, and that is Eddie's Dreaming. Now, who is Eddie? I had always thought that Eddie, from reading up on Andrew Loog Oldham, I always thought that Eddie was Andrew Loog Oldham's driver, Eddie, who apparently was a hell of a guy to be around. He was kind of, I guess, the center of the party in a lot of ways. But no, the titular Eddie is Eddie Thornton, who was the trumpet player for Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames, who play on this to incredible effect. So this is Ronnie Lane kind of just stealing the show at the end. I mean, this has been such a Steve Marriott heavy album at times, and he's so incredible. But Ronnie Lane comes out. This is... So you think about the Who Sell Out ending with Ray Al, right? You think about, Sgt. Pepper ending with A Day in the Life. You think, and then this album ends with, and like Between the Buttons ends with like a send up, right? Like Something Happened to Me Yesterday. It ends with, a send up. This ends with none of those. This ends with a completely different world. And it is, again, it's a really fun song. It is, again, compulsively listenable. I can listen to this song for 45 minutes easily. This is my second favorite. Afterglow is always going to be my number one. This is my second favorite Small Faces song. This is one of my favorite songs of all time. This is like one of my top 10 or 20 favorite songs by anyone ever. I absolutely fucking love Eddie's Dreaming. It is, so the percussion, and I haven't mentioned... Kenny Jones, there's a lot of great percussion work on this album. And in addition, like on Show Me the Way and stuff, there's great percussion work. I've kind of neglected to talk about that, but you'll hear all that when you check this album out, right? Or hear it again for the first time. So fucking Eddie's Dreaming is this weird piece of, I don't even know what, Caribbean cod tropicalia, / R&B. I don't know what it is. It defies genre. The horns, these are some of the best horns ever on a record. These are like the best use of horns. That sort of galloping intro line that they give themselves, it's, oh my God. And these lyrics, these absurd touristy lyrics, this bemused cad gadding about on an island somewhere. It's so absurd. And Ray Davies, God bless him, I love him. But Ray Davies, if this was on Face to Face, Ray Davies would have turned this into like some sort of like commentary, or it would have been some sort of social point that he was going to make or something. This is not that. This is just purely like, I don't even know if I guess it's a character study of Eddie, but it's just such a ridiculous song that like kind of doesn't make any sense. And that middle section, the breakdown, with the percussion and the drums, and then the flute solo, this beautiful fucking perfect flute solo that floats through everything. But that breakdown, and then when the horns come back in and play the second melody that they do, that they wind up repeating again towards the end. Oh my God, that da-da-da, da-da-da, like that should be a hip hop cliche by now. God damn it. Like that should be one of the most sampled things. Like that breakdown with the percussion, with the congas, should be like one of the most sampled things ever. It is so goddamn good, and it's fucking funky. Like these are not These are not white boys trying to be soulful. These are not white boys trying to play the blues or be funky. These guys actually are. These guys can actually do that shit for real because they love it and they are it. And they transcend whatever lines you want to throw out there, man. This is, I don't feel like I'm doing this justice at all because I don't know how in the hell they came up with this song. I don't know where it came from. I also love the fact that it's the best song on the album, I'm gonna say. And it's not a major statement. It makes a joke out of the idea of trying to make the end of the album a major statement. And yet there's nothing, it's not a piss take, it's not a send up, it's not a knees up. It's weirdly relatable and it's, I don't know, it's joyous. It's just joyous. It's wonderful. It's just, I don't know what else to say. It is one of my favorite songs of all time. It's so goddamn good. And Eddie's dreaming, always like, I don't know. I don't know what it is other than I love it. And I love it kind of more than most songs. It just gets me every time. It's so spectacular. And then of course, it 2 minutes 54. So it's the longest song on the album. And it ends with like them gadding about in the studio, being the hyperactive, wild fucking young men that they were. And it's just one of the greatest like portraits of youth. In not at all trying to make a major statement. In like it's so, there are zero artistic pretensions to Eddie's. It somehow becomes its own artistic statement. It becomes joy as a means to its own end, or lust for life. Lust for life as a means to its own end. It's glorious, Eddie's dreaming. He's always dreaming. Like fucking perfect. What a perfect album. A perfectly constructed, perfect album. But the Small Faces were still not done yet in 1967. Damn it. About 2 weeks after the Small Faces released this incredible album, they were back in the studio. They're back at Olympic recording again. Unbelievable. And on August 4th of 1967, they released their third single of the year. And the one that was their big hit in America. The thing that could have broke them in America fully. And that was Itchycoo Park. So Itchycoo Park is... I mean, I had heard the song long before I really had a sense of the Small... I didn't know that it was the Small Faces, right? So Itchycoo Park, in that year of these incredible singles, is this their ultimate defining pop statement? I would say so. Is it one of the ultimate defining psychedelic singles of all time? Yeah, how could it not be? This is, I think, in some ways a little bit more of a Ronnie Lane song, whereas I think Here Come the Nice was perhaps a little bit more Steve. But these are still, I mean, you can pick out the Steve bits of Itchycoo Park. Steve takes the lead vocal, an absolute stunner of a lead vocal. I mean, it's a fucking flawless goddamn vocal performance, just perfect. But the first thing about Itchycoo Park is that intro, and Ian McLagan does a piano roll that is, it's so confident. These guys are so sure of themselves. And that intro, what kills me is that they only play it once. They could have repeated that 2 or 4 times. That intro is just the motherfucker of intros. And it, like, that plays in my head on repeat, basically. But the song itself, the lyric, Ronnie Lane handling most of the lyric. So again, kind of like Here Come the Nice, there again is this weird religious element to it. So apparently Ronnie Lane pulled inspiration from the song, and I had to look it up, from the hymn God Be in My Head. And that, and a tourist, like a pamphlet that had written depictions of Oxford. So the Bridge of Spires and some of the imagery comes from this pamphlet. And it's just such a glorious song. So yes, it is again sort of painting the drug experience as this boundless, wonderful thing. This time, they didn't really get away with it. I think they ran into a bunch of problems in America as the song. I think it would have been even more popular had it not hit into some of those problems. But it is a melodic marvel. All the little B section of it, that and that's part of the thing is you have the ethereal God be in my head aspect of what Ronnie's doing, and then Steve punctuates with the B section, the breakdown, the fun in the sun, and I love that, and feeding ducks with a bun. That's so fucking awesome to me, and I love that contrast, and just the completely self-assured confidence that these guys have. These guys hit it like, and I love that about them. But part of also what I find interesting about it in their psychedelic finery, there's a very interesting moment in the Small Faces, far more than any other band out of the British Invasion. They're weirdly informed by their parents, partly because they were so young, but kind of in the same way that Nirvana somehow, that his mom and Kurt Cobain's mom and dad were being interviewed. Like, nobody ever talked to Billy Corgan's parents. Nobody ever talked to Chris Cornell's parents. He didn't know he didn't know that if Chris Cornell even had parents, right? Nobody ever talked to them. It's just for some reason there were interviews with Kurt's dad. He hadn't been famous for 4 months, and there's interviews with his mom. It was very weird, and so there is this funny thing of, like, Steve's dad is sort of this tangential part of, like, the British beat boom, because fans would seek out the Marriott house, and he would, like, the mom and him, they'd invite these schoolgirls in for tea because they just didn't know what to do with them. So there is a fascinating. So in October of '67, John Lennon and George Harrison went on the David Frost show and talked about the Maharishi. And as we know, because he later became a devotee to some degree of Meher Baba, Ronnie Lane was with it. And Ronnie Lane's dad, who, the working classness, the salt of the earthness of the Small Faces never left them. And so there is a fascinating discussion that's captured between Ronnie Lane and his dad. Ronnie Lane being super all about what the Beatles are doing, and his dad cautiously saying, "Oh, I don't know," and basically saying the working class, if you're working all day in a factory, you're going to maybe go down to the pub, and then you're going to watch telly with the wife, and that's it. And we don't have time in our lives to think about these wide-ranging issues and think about the state of the world or whatever. And the Small Faces, I think, more than any other band, really are the sort of example of because part of the thing about Swinging London, and I don't criticize this about Swinging London. I think the spirit behind it was very healthy, but there was the sort of idea that Swinging London was to be classless, and and speaking as an American, I mean, there's America, it gets even weirder because then you have class and race that are bizarrely intertwined that nobody really ever wants to realistically try to undo, to actually deal with these things in a realistic way. And it's one of the things that I find incredibly frustrating, especially as the decades have gone along. But the Small Faces are really fascinating because the class clashed with the counterculture, and you see it in this, and not just in a generational sense, but also in we just don't have the time in the day to do this or to think like this. That is fascinating. And Ronnie Lane, and it's a very respectful exchange. There's no like, go to bed, old man. Like they take each other seriously. And what I find so interesting is Ronnie Lane is basically saying like, no, this could help people, and I think that this is a good idea, and people should like try to meditate and try to and he's like, and it's been helpful for me. And there's this really interesting part of the exchange where the dad says, well, no, Ronnie, that's because you have talent. You aren't like other people. You're talented. And he's like, no, I'm not like I'm just like everybody else. And everybody could benefit from this. And the dad is like, no, they have talents that you don't have. And he's like, no, they could have talents if they were developed. And the dad's like, I'm really not sure about that, son. And Ronnie Lane's like, no, if these other people were your kid, you'd be championing them too. It's such an interesting exchange, and it's so respectful, but it's also really touching how much his dad believes in him. And how he doesn't want to say like screw you to his dad. It's there's something very beautiful about it, and that they're willing to talk about it, and they're willing to try to sort it out, even if at the end they come to say, well, I still think this, and oh, I still think this. It's really, really interesting, and I feel like you see that even reflected in Itchycoo Park, that it's not simplistic enough to be a piece of lifestyle propaganda, and there's a humor to it, and in fact Steve Marriott often talked about the fact that it was a send up of hippie culture, and that they didn't really consider themselves hippies. So I find all of that fascinating. And also the other thing I would be remiss if I did not mention is the drum phasing. So I think that was Glyn Johns'. I want to say that was his breakthrough. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it was. And this was the first major piece of phasing on a record, and that adds to the psychedelia and to the beauty and brilliance of it and the vibrancy of it. So a perfect single. Then the B-side is a absolute gem called "I'm Only Dreaming." And I'm Only Dreaming is a piece of, romantic desolation, post-romance desolation. And Steve is way up in the mix. It is one of the most beautiful vocal performances of his life. Maybe the best singing he had done up until this point. It's so soulful and so real, and his phrasing is just immaculate, and the emphasis of certain words and the drawing out of certain syllables is absolutely beautiful. It is an incredible vocal performance. And that's before he starts belting it out in the refrain. Like, it's before he even gets to that point. And again, that you go, and there's the mellotron, so there's this sort of homespun, weird, slightly otherworldly intimacy, and then it goes into being a real soul belter, and the band is tight and funky and awesome. And then out of nowhere, Steve being Steve, it's almost as if Steve goes, fuck this, I'm tired of being sad, and there's the big piano break with the drums, the boom, bum, 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 and it becomes super danceable, and it becomes this awesome. I thought it was like a baritone sax solo, and I thought, how wild that they, on this very brief little song, that's amazing. They got a guy to come in. Apparently, that is goddamn Ian McClagan on the fucking mellotron. How awesome is that? And it's a beautiful solo. It's an awesome, like, kind of art, somewhere between splitting. It's again this sort of weird Dixieland jazz thing. It's awesome. It's so cool, and a complete like mood shift of, all right, I've been sad long enough. Brilliant. And then again, an awesome B-side. But somehow the Small Faces, unbelievably, were still not done in 1967. Over the course of a week in October of 1967 and released on December the 2nd, the Small Faces put out their fourth and final single of the year, and that is the epical Tin Soldier, with a beautiful blurred photo on the sleeve. And by this point, Chrissy Shrimpton had come and gone, And Steve was infatuated with the woman who would wind up becoming his first wife, a woman by the name of Jenny Rylance. And he wrote Tin Soldier for her and to her and about her. And so the band they weren't really interested in being a pop band. They were really not interested, especially after the success of Itchycoo Park. They really wanted to establish themselves as a rock and roll band. And funneling into what they did on Talk to You, we get into Tin Soldier. So Tin Soldier, first of all, there's a count in, but there is those amazing, tough, arpeggiated chords. And this is really like, in a lot of ways, like this is kind of the birth of a lot of what you hear on 70s hard rock. Like this is where they really forge a lot of that sound. And Tin Soldier, it begins quiet. Basically, Tin Soldier is in microcosm as a song the whole of the Small Faces in 1967. And it begins quiet, vulnerable, earnest, real is the most important part, real. And this is the ultimate in the plea for emotional honesty. The song was originally written for the soul singer on former Ikette, P.P. Arnold, who wound up recording in her own right. But this song was written for her. Steve, apparently people were like, no, you've got to make that the next single for yourself, man. So kind of like Kiss, or Prince wrote it for Maserati and then took that one back. The Small Faces took it back. So the song starts to build, and there is again this tough, tight furiousness and coiled energy of the buildup and of the intensity of Steve's vocal, right? And that is when it launches into the chorus. And that's when P.P. Arnold comes storming in. And everything goes up a level from there into this absolute massive, ultimate shiver of a chorus. But this isn't psychedelic. This is played with like full bore, full-blooded, like blood and guts fucking rock and roll power. And what really happens in this song is it splits the difference between the gnarled psychological core of Strawberry Fields Forever, but with Jumpin' Jack Flash by way of all day, all night rock and roll power and coiled tension and then explosion of that tension. And with P.P. Arnold singing along, it prefigures what winds up happening on Gimme Shelter. But this, as much as the release, I'm going to say, as much as the release of John Wesley Harding is the back to basics thunderclap, right? That's quiet in the distance. This is a major rock and roll statement. And it comes at the end of the year. It comes at the end of the summer of love. And this thundering fucking rock and roll masterpiece. Those rhythm breaks, talk about the fucking breaks that with proto John Lord organ interjections from Ian McClagan, incredible, and Kenny Jones thundering away for his life. And it's tough and hard and also like weirdly it's danceable, and it's again like pop art action and impact and again immediacy. But what's so amazing is they go back into the chorus and Steve, the thing is like this is a full bore like, Stella, like shredding of self, of shredding of notions of cool, of needing somebody, of being so driven by the mania of that you're willing to expose yourself, expose all of your insecurities. And it seems like the song has reached its sort of climax just before, like around 2 minutes 45, and it's just it's it's and the intensity, like you've been through the cloud of this incredible uprush of emotional intensity and musical power, and then Steve's still wailing away. He's still screaming over the top, but you think it's going to start to fade away. And that's when Steve comes fucking back with, I guess you'd call it the verse or the proclamation. And it's full bore. This is the best singing of his career. This is like he tops everything he's ever done. Those stakes are real. It's white knuckle. It is blood and guts. And he fucking goes for the fucking throat with that ending, and that it all just, and this one final crescendo, the crescendo on a song that has been nothing but a crescendo, on an artistic leap that has been nothing but a crescendo over the course of a year, and that final 20 seconds where everything then goes up a level and P.P. Arnold joins him for the final declamatory "Because I Love You" of just total like fucking this ultimate assertion of self, of take me as I am, because he does kind of like the buried slur of Ronnie Lane's voice. Fucking Steve says before it fades away, and that's actually the thing that provokes him into like one final declaration of Stella, shirt ripped, fucking screaming into the rain. But it's fucking for real. It's Van Gogh's ear. It is the crescendo within the crescendo within the crescendo. It is the ultimate statement. It is them as a rock band, as pop titans. It is them. It is all of these things at once. It is an absolute masterpiece, to use the British term. It is a stonker. It is one of the greatest fucking rock and roll recordings of all time. It is truly for the ages. And then there's the B-side. What do you try to top it for the B-side? No, you don't. The B-side is I Feel Much Better, a really, really out there piece of Ronnie Lane's psychedelia that I will admit I did not care for at first, and I have totally warmed to. First of all, it begins with a really goddamn great gut-churning bass line from Ronnie Lane. If you are familiar, speaking of Kiss, if you are familiar with, and this is not intentional, but if you're familiar with the B-side of Kiss, as I have called it before, the daffy tilt-a-whirl that is Love or Money. Another song I didn't really get the first few times. This is the psychedelic rock and roll version of Love or Money, 20 years before. It's a daffy tilt-a-whirl, and again, a lot of very speed voices. And it is such a weird fucking song, but it has that kind of Rolling Stones Dandelion thing where there's like a proper song in there somewhere and has an English reservedness to it as it's being totally bonkers and bananas. I've come to really love it. And then, like a few other Small Faces, midway through they say fuck it and basically start playing like kind of Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels kind of stuff, like and sort of proto MC5 riffing, and start all racing against each other, and then it has this totally absurd fade out that doesn't really fade out, and then comes back for like another like 1/4 of the record. It is a wild, weird B-side because you cannot top Tin Soldier. Tin Soldier is an ultimate statement. So I will just very, very, very quickly run through anything I missed. There is a great instrumental from the early IBC period called Pickaninny that's on a few different compilations. It's a great blues instrumental. Again, these are not white boys trying to play the blues. These are just extremely young, talented, creative men playing the blues. And it's awesome. What else is there? There is there is the great unreleased song "Don't Burst My Bubble," Steve, which totally could have been a B-side or an album track, but it could have really worked as a B-side. It's a phenomenal piece of writing. Steve's reflections on fame and what freaked him out about the way his audience was treated. It's a fantastic song, and again, another great assertion of self with a lot of R&B dynamics in it. It's a magnificent song. It's on here. Super Pickaninny is not on here, but Don't Burst My Bubble is super worth checking out. Again, this is the version that's on YouTube, so you can go find it. And what else? Oh, and then finally, which this is slightly outside the scope, but December '67, they started working in earnest on the P.P. Arnold album, and they gave her the song "If You Think You're Groovy," which is awesome. So the backing track is on here. The full version is on the Here Come the Nice box set, but you can find the song easily enough on YouTube. I'll link to it as well. And it's an awesome song. It's an awesome soul song. She does a hell of a version of it. The horn arrangement's amazing. So the Small Faces play on it. So they were dubbed The Lot because it was P.P. Arnold and the Small Faces. So they were dubbed The Lot by Andrew Loog Oldham. And so the Small Faces are prominently in the promo clip. Also, I should say that the Itchycoo Park has a terrible quality version out, but I'll link to that. Great promo film for that, with like them frolicking around in Itchycoo Park. Awesome, and dressed in wild psychedelic clothes that I wish you could see better, because there are detailed descriptions of the outfits in articles from that time. So anyway, so that is the Small Faces. I hope you have enjoyed this. We have well now past the 200 subscriber mark, so thank you very much to each and every one of you. I greatly appreciate it. It is a really cool thing, and I have been kind of working on 2 videos concurrently, so the next one will be around in a couple weeks. I have to, really get into it, because this one took a lot of time, and because I want to do it right, goddammit. So anyway, so I hope that you've enjoyed this. Please like and comment and subscribe and all of the other all the other YouTube things, and like I said, I will be back soon enough in a couple weeks with another exciting video. So again, thank you very much for watching, and yeah, so until next time, until I see you all next time in the next video, bye!
Just finished watching Rich